Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a garden so lavish, so oddly specific, that it only comes alive after midnight. You won't hear about it on your average history podcast, because this is one of those soft-footed secrets whispered through layers of velvet and petals. Picture yourself standing outside the gates of the Topkapi Palace in Istanbul, not as a tourist, not holding a selfie stick, but as someone about to stumble into something bizarre, beautiful, and faintly absurd. Imagine the moon hanging low and smug, lighting up flower beds like they're auditioning for a perfume ad. The air smells like roasted pistachio, melting candle wax, and tulip pollen, if pollen could smell like drama and imperial taxes. You've been warned that the Sultans throw tulip festivals at the weirdest hour of the night for reasons nobody quite understands. And tonight, you're not just watching. You're in it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Drop your city and the time in the comments, unless it's 3:17 a.m. and you're pretending it's still midnight. I see you. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're dragging your sandals through gravel that's definitely not supposed to be walked on. Around you, huge tulip beds stretch in neat grids like royal spreadsheets color-coded in impossible shades, blood sugar pink, ghost white yellows that scream instead of whisper. You tiptoe under arches of climbing jasmine while trying not to sneeze. Ottoman gardens were all about symmetry perfection, and the occasional rogue peacock who acts like it owns the place. You dodge one now. It glares. Up ahead, the garden is strangely alive. Not loud alive, like something is waiting. There are guards dressed in gold thread who seem to be guarding flower pots. Not treasure, not a secret vault, flower pots. You try not to laugh, but it's one of those weird midnight chuckles that slips out and echoes a bit too far. Someone shushes you from the shadows. You crouch beside a box hedge shaped like a galloping horse or a melted chess piece, depending on your optimism, and try to get your bearings. Why would the mighty Ottoman Empire, the same empire that controlled 3 continents and terrified European kings, invest so much time, manpower, and candle wax into midnight tulip viewing? Turns out the answer is both more poetic and more ridiculous than you expect. Because tulips weren't just flowers. In 18th century Istanbul, tulips were obsession level. We're talking Taylor Swift album release night levels of obsession. There were official tulip registers, tulip inspectors, tulip taxes, and you're now standing ankle deep in the middle of a floral cult. A court servant shuffles by holding what looks like a golden squirt bottle. It's rose water. He mists it onto the flowers, apparently, so they catch the moonlight better. You nod politely, as if that makes perfect sense. Meanwhile, another man is painting the stems of a tulip green, not the flower, just the stem. Because it wasn't green enough. Again, you pretend that tracks. A small orchestra is tuning up somewhere behind the cypresses. But instead of tuning forks, they're using tiny glasses of pomegranate syrup. You're not sure why. Maybe the notes sound sweeter. And then someone coughs. A sharp, authority-filled cough. The kind of cough that means someone important is about to stroll by. You flatten yourself behind a trellis and peek through the lattice. He walks in wearing slippers made of velvet and ego. A man draped in deep navy robes embroidered with threads that glint like shooting stars. On his head, no crown, just a simple tulip, tucked behind one ear. That's the Sultan, no doubt about it. And he looks like he's been waiting all day for this moment. But here's the twist. No one acknowledges him. Not a bow, not a salute. The musicians don't even flinch. That's because tonight, everyone pretends not to know who the Sultan is. It's a game, a test, or maybe just how bored you get when you run an empire and need a little mystery in your life. You follow at a safe distance, nearly tripping over a decorative turtle. The Sultan strolls between rows of tulips, hands behind his back, pausing now and then to whisper something into a courtier's ear or to pluck a petal and sniff it like it holds the answer to geopolitical strategy. Some tulips are propped up with toothpick-sized sticks. Others wear tiny silk covers. You wonder if these flowers have a better dental plan than you. Then you see it a tulip so black it looks painted in squid ink. A servant bows to it, literally bows. You glance around expecting someone to snicker, but nope, that's protocol. That tulip, you learn, is called Night's Mirror. It's been cultivated for 20 years by monks who listen to flute music and whisper compliments to the soil. Supposedly, it only opens its petals when it hears a certain melody. So naturally, a musician starts playing a tune that sounds like what a cat would compose after a breakup. And here's where things get stranger. As the music plays, the tulip does open, slowly, like it's been waiting for its spotlight. Gasps ripple through the crowd. You clap instinctively, then remember you're supposed to be invisible. Too late. The Sultan turns. Your eyes lock. His face crinkles, not in anger, but with amusement. He raises a brow, then he winks. You might have just been recruited for something, or cursed, or both, but either way, you're officially part of the strangest midnight party in history. You stand frozen like a human garden gnome, still trying to process whether the Sultan's wink was an invitation or just something stuck in his eye. But he's already turned, gliding deeper into the illuminated grove where tulips gleam like glass teeth under moonlight. The music shifts into a more fluttering tune part, lullaby part. You just joined a secret society without meaning to. A servant bumps into you while balancing an absurdly large tray of candied apricots stacked like medieval Jenga. He doesn't question your presence either. He assumes you belong here, or no one dares ask questions once the tulips come out. You blend back into the crowd, or what counts as a crowd, when everyone's dressed like decorative curtains and moving in slow motion. Now that your adrenaline is no longer threatening to turn your knees into pudding, you start to notice the paintings, not on the walls, on the flowers. Yes, actual tiny brushstrokes along tulip petals. Some tulips have birds on them. Others show stars or poems written in miniature calligraphy. One has what looks like a cat playing chess. You squint. It's a cat checkmating a sultan. Subtle. Turns out the sultans weren't just flower lovers, they were full-blown tulip fanatics. Imagine someone today building a $40 million stadium just to watch their favorite flower bloom for 4 minutes. That was the energy. In fact, the Ottoman court had something called l'âle d'Ivry, or the tulip era, which historians say was both the most elegant and the most financially irresponsible phase in imperial life. Kind of like maxing out your empire's credit card at a botanical garden. You overhear two noblemen arguing softly about bulb prices. One insists he paid only the value of a small mansion for a rare fire-tipped tulip called Blushing Widow. The other scoffs his cost more. You stifle a laugh until you realize they're serious, dead serious. There's real estate involved. As you wander past rows of silk divans and gold-threaded canopies, you start to realize something else. This isn't just a festival. It's a performance of power. By holding these gatherings in the middle of the night, the Sultan was signaling dominance over time itself. He didn't follow the sun followed him. The court obeyed his schedule, not the universe's, and the tulips. Well, they bloomed because he told them to, or at least that's what everyone whispered. You step over a low velvet rope that totally wasn't meant to be stepped over and find yourself near a series of shaded pavilions. Inside, scribes with ink-stained fingers are copying Tulip poems onto paper, so thin it flutters if you so much as blink at it. Each poem has to be read under lamplight, each line dedicated to a single tulip. There's one poem, half a page long entirely, about how a tulip drooped dramatically after not being watered for 3 hours. You nod solemnly. You too have felt that level of emotional dehydration. And just beyond the pavilions, you stumble upon something unexpected, a small elevated platform lined with satin pillows. From it, you hear the soft murmur of a story being told, a legend, really, about how the first tulip festival began. Apparently, centuries ago, one sultan had a single sleepless night. Restless, he wandered into the gardens and found a cluster of tulips glowing in the moonlight, dewy and oddly theatrical. Inspired, he summoned his court. At 3 a.m, servants, musicians, poets, all groggy, all barefoot, all summoned, because his imperial wakefulness had a feeling about the flowers. And it worked. That first impromptu gathering turned into an annual event, then a seasonal one, then an imperial obsession. Over time it grew grander, more secretive. Music composed just for tulips, paint mixed with crushed pearls, perfume fountains, and allegedly once a rain of rose petals dropped from silk balloons. Historians still debate whether that last part actually happened, or if it was just a hallucination caused by too much clove sherbet. Suddenly, a hush falls over the entire garden. You freeze mid-step, a pistachio half crunched in your mouth. Everyone's attention swivels toward a hillock where the Sultan is standing again, not in robes this time, but in plain linen, like a gardener. He raises one hand. The music stops. Then slowly, he crouches down next to a tulip in full bloom. The crowd leans forward as if watching an eclipse. And then, with the careful precision of someone opening a priceless letter, the Sultan gently plucks one petal and lets it fall into a bowl of water. Silence. And then, polite applause. You join in, unsure whether this was some kind of metaphor or just him making tulip soup. A young girl beside you whispers, that tulip was called the Breath of Dawn. They say its petals hold the dreams of emperors. You glance at her, then at the flower bowl, and wonder what you just witnessed. A ritual, a prank, a deeply symbolic act that will eventually get misquoted in a museum. You'll never know. But you can feel it, that strange, shivery knowledge that you've just seen something ancient, ridiculous, and somehow unforgettable. Like watching someone propose using a falcon as a ring bearer. The music resumes, but softer now. The mood has shifted. You sense the night deepening, not darker, but deeper, as if time itself is politely pausing to let the moment linger. And you, well, you're still here, still pretending you belong, still wondering how far this dream will carry you before someone notices your shoes don't match your caftan. By now, your feet have adjusted to the gentle ache of standing too long in embroidered slippers that definitely weren't designed for stealth. Somewhere nearby, a tray of rose sherbet is being passed around, and you shamelessly intercept a glass. It tastes like flowers trying to flirt with your taste buds, sweet perfumed and a little too confident. You wander down a pebbled path flanked by lanterns floating in shallow water channels. It's like the moon fell into pieces and someone gently spread the shards across the garden. Every few steps, the soft clink of glass bumps into itself, and the flickers ripple out in concentric circles. You pause to admire one flame dancing inside a cut glass orb, only to realize the light is actually a cluster of fireflies. Yes, fireflies inside the lantern. Apparently, Ottoman gardeners had the patience of saints and the skill of illusionists. The tiny glass globes were filled with trained fireflies. Trained might be a strong word, but you assume there was a guy somewhere on the palace payroll whose entire job was to coax fireflies into politely glowing on cue. That, or they just bribed them with honey vapor. Either way, you add bug lantern handler to your list of potential historical job regrets. A gardener hums nearby while carefully adjusting each lantern with a long reed pole. You hear him whisper, "Too much wind, not enough mystery." You nod. Deep. Your path loops around a reflecting pool where upside-down tulips float like jellyfish. A small boy is poking one gently, pretending it's a boat. He's wearing a silk cap that keeps slipping sideways and a very serious expression like he's conducting imperial naval experiments. You pass under a trellis of blooming wisteria, and just as you duck, you catch sight of a group of court servants carrying something strange, a series of delicate oil lamps shaped like swans. Each one is set afloat onto the water with a tiny slip of poetry folded beneath its base, a message, a wish, or maybe just palace gossip in rhyming couplets. This, you learn, is part of the ritual. Every tulip festival, the Sultan chooses a single lamp poem to be read aloud. The others, they're left to drift, unread their words, dissolving quietly into the water, like forgotten dreams. You try not to be poetic about it, but come on, it's a garden of floating birds and mystery notes. Even your inner sarcasm takes a break. From across the pool, you hear laughter. Not loud, that refined court kind of laugh. That sounds like someone politely trying not to offend a fruit basket. A pair of women, faces half covered in embroidered veils, are fanning themselves as they gossip in hushed Turkish. You can't catch every word, but you do make out last year's disaster with the flaming tulip followed by snorts. Apparently, fire and florals don't always mix. Just then, a court official taps a tiny gong. It sounds like a spoon tapping a crystal glass. Everyone quiets down again. You crane your neck to see the reason for the interruption. A line of palace guards enters, flanking a small cart draped in velvet. On it, a single tulip in a gold-trimmed pot, carried like it's an infant pharaoh. The petals are deep orange with stripes of gold, and it practically hums with self-importance. An elderly courtier in an unnecessarily tall hat begins reciting its lineage. This noble guest is Golden Whisker of the Dawn, child of Amber Sultan and Phoenix Breath, first bloomed under the last snowfall, blessed by the gardener Hamid Bey after his 17th dream. You stop listening after a while, mostly because the tulip seems to be getting more genealogical attention than some actual Ottoman princes. Still, this isn't just plant pageantry. According to the woman next to you who smells strongly of cloves and possibly ambition, this tulip was grown under controlled conditions inside a silver-lined greenhouse shaped like a crescent moon. No soil from outside was allowed. The bulbs were sung to every evening by eunuchs with flutes, watered with dew collected from the peaks of Mount Uludağ. And that's not even the weirdest part, because tonight this tulip will be judged. You blink, judged like a pageant. Yes, the Midnight Tulip Festival includes a secretive beauty contest for flowers. And the judges, a mix of court poets, florists, and one astronomer for mysterious balance, will determine whether Golden Whisker is worthy of the Sultan's ceremonial nod. What happens if the flower loses, you ask? The woman shrugs, probably shame, possibly pickling, or being replanted in less prestigious soil. You suppress a giggle and decide not to root for any specific tulip. You don't want to be emotionally devastated if your favorite gets disqualified for being too enthusiastic. As the judging panel convenes near a velvet pavilion, another figure slips into view, hooded, cloaked, and surprisingly short. You recognize the embroidered boots. It's the Sultan again, still in disguise. This time, though, he's holding a notebook. He scribbles something, then nods at the judges. You wonder what it's like to be the ruler of an empire and still feel the need to play floral talent scout in a bathrobe. But that's the thing. These midnight festivals weren't just about aesthetics. They were layers upon layers of symbolism, power, mortality, renewal. The tulip, with its brief, glorious bloom, was a metaphor for imperial majesty and the fleeting nature of beauty. Also, it was just really fun to show off. As the tulip is hoisted slightly for everyone to see, a hush ripples again. Even the fireflies seem to dim in anticipation. The Sultan leans forward. Everyone holds their breath, and then, with a subtle nod, he gives his approval. The garden erupts in the softest applause known to humankind, just palms tapping silk, no sound, just motion. The tulip wins. The cart rolls away. Somewhere, a flute plays a triumphant note. Somewhere else, a jealous bulb withers slightly. And you're still here pretending you're just a harmless bystander and not slowly being hypnotized by the strange, beautiful absurdity of it all. You're pulled from your tulip-induced trance by a very enthusiastic man in a mustard yellow robe who mistakes you for someone named Kemal. Before you can protest, he hands you a scroll and points to a nearby pavilion covered in tulip motifs and embroidered poetry. "You're late," he whispers. "Your shift started at moonrise." "Ah, you've been drafted." With all the dignity of someone who just tripped over a vine, you shuffle over to the pavilion and unroll the scroll. It's covered in handwritten tulip names, bizarrely specific mood indicators, slightly petulant, pensive, but photogenic, and tiny sketches of each bloom's preferred lighting angle. There's even a note that says, "Do not speak near Crimson Whimsy." She sulks. Apparently, you've been assigned to the court's most delicate team, the Tulip Guardians. Not guards, guardians. Their job, observe the flowers, record their moods, adjust lighting, prevent emotional breakdowns. The tulip's not theirs, though that line gets blurry. You stand beside a guard who introduces himself as Hassan. He takes his tulip duty very seriously. "This one here," he says, gesturing to a tall purple bloom once refused to open because someone wore the wrong shade of green nearby. Flowers have standards. You nod slowly, unsure if this is satire or state policy. Hassan walks you through the process. Every tulip must be observed for petal behavior. A tremble might mean it's too cold. A sudden droop could signal emotional distress. A full, arrogant flare. That's the goal. Confidence in a flower, he whispers, is rarer than gold. Your job is simple. Stand near the bed of elite tulips and jot down anything unusual. Easy, right? Except 20 minutes in one of the tulips, a pale apricot one called Blushing Crescent appears to swoon. Not droop. Swoon. It bends gently toward your direction, its petals twitching. Hassan gasps. She likes you. What do you even do with that? You bow politely because apparently we're doing this now. A few other tulips rustle, a petal falls. It's unclear whether that's flattery or scandal, just as you're considering whether flower flirting is now part of your CV. A pair of court artists arrives with sketch pads. They begin drawing you, not because you're important, but because Blushing Crescent has never swooned before. Historic. You're trying to process the fact that you're being immortalized in a tulip's romantic awakening when suddenly the breeze shifts and a trumpet softly announces the arrival of the Sultan. Not the man in linen from earlier. This time it's full regalia. Bejeweled caftan, embroidered sash, a tulip motif cloak that swishes like drama incarnate. This is Sultan Ahmed III in official festival mode, and he's surrounded by more tulip guardians, each carrying a cushion with a different bloom. They arrange the flowers in a semicircle around him. He nods approvingly, then raises a small glass of saffron sherbet in a toast. To beauty, he says simply, to madness, to midnight. The court repeats the toast like a sacred chant. You raise your own cup, unsure if you're drinking to the flowers or just to survive another hour without tripping on a peacock. The Sultan begins to walk among the guardians, offering a word here, a gesture there. When he reaches you, he pauses. You are the one who calmed Blushing Crescent. You open your mouth, then close it, then nod like someone who just got credit for calming a flower having an existential spiral. He smiles. You have the soul of a gardener or a bard. Either way, the tulips trust you. And just like that, he moves on. You exhale. Hassan clutches your arm. You're part of the story now, he hisses. You'll be in the records. Sure enough, one of the artists is already painting your likeness next to the swooning tulip. You wonder if your nose is being flattered. You also wonder what your family will think when they hear you were declared emotionally compatible with high-strung flora. But there's no time to dwell. The next assignment comes in a whisper, a special tulip, deep violet and notoriously moody, hasn't opened all season. They want you to encourage it. You're ushered to a secluded nook of the garden where the tulip named Silent Widow stands tall, closed, and frankly kind of judgmental. You try speaking gently, nothing. You sing a lullaby, still nothing. Then, as a last-ditch effort, you tell it the story of your own sleepless night, how you found your way into this place, how everything feels like a fever dream, painted in silk and candle smoke. And in that moment, something shifts. The tulip opens just one petal. But it's enough. The watching attendants gasp. One faints. A flutist somewhere strikes a dramatic note. You feel weirdly proud, like you just unlocked a very niche video game achievement. They leave you with the tulip for a while, trusting that you'll continue to guide her toward full expression, which is both touching and incredibly stressful. So you sit in the quiet beside a flower at midnight, in the heart of a garden ruled by moonlight and music, and you wonder what kind of empire gives this much attention to a petals movement. And then you realize one that understands beauty as power, one that knows a single bloom admired at the right moment can make emperors pause and poets weep. And apparently one where you now work unofficially as a midnight flower therapist. By now you've resigned yourself to the fact that your life has spiraled into a very specific genre of historical hallucination, tulip-fueled imperial performance art. You sit next to Silent Widow, still partially open, gently humming what might be a lullaby or just a very uncertain version of a sheep-counting song. The night air is cooler now, scented with jasmine and the faintest wisp of clove smoke from a nearby incense stand. You think maybe things will quiet down, that maybe this next stretch of the festival will be less strange. Wrong, because suddenly the air around you shifts. Not like a gust, more like the attention in the garden pivots, and from the silk curtain shadows steps a figure dressed in rough spun linen, a plain leather belt, and sandals that have seen some things. He looks like a servant, a gardener, or maybe a lost spice merchant, except everyone steps back. It's the Sultan again. This time without fanfare, without jewels, without even a bodyguard. Just him, quiet, under the moon, like he's slipping back into himself after a long day of being emperor-shaped. He doesn't head toward the palace or the thrones or the gardens of endless fanfare. No, he's walking among the festival crowd, incognito sort of, except every person he passes stares at the ground and pretends he's a stranger. That's the rule. You don't acknowledge the Sultan when he's in listening mode. You instinctively do the same, though you do peek once through your lashes because you're only human. He's humming, and oh no, is he heading your way again? He is. You stand abruptly and nearly trip over a pile of decorative pebbles. Smooth. He gestures to the cushion beside you, not ordering but asking. You nod and scoot over like someone who just got invited to sit next to Beyoncé at a picnic, but isn't sure if the sandwich they're holding is fancy enough. He sits. You're the one with the calming voice, he says. The flowers like it. You blink. I think they just needed someone to listen, he chuckles. Don't we all? You both stare at the tulip Silent Widow, which now trembles slightly. Not from wind, there isn't any. Maybe from knowing the Sultan is sitting within sneeze range. He gestures toward the surrounding pavilions. It's all a bit much, isn't it? You try to look neutral, but the phrase a bit much feels like the understatement of the century. Silk tulip tents, perfumed firefly chandeliers, musicians in bushes. It's like Versailles collided with a botanical cosplay. He smiles as if reading your thoughts. It started simply. One sleepless night, one bloom by moonlight. Now it's all velvet and ceremony. You nod, and poetry duels, and judging contests, and flower mood charts. He laughs, actually laughs. Not a royal chuckle, a real one, like someone who's just remembered how absurd power can be. I wonder sometimes, he says, looking at his hands, whether I rule an empire or it rules me. That's heavy. Too heavy for a conversation held next to a tulip that sounds like a haunted opera singer. But you feel the need to say something. So you go with, well, At least your empire smells incredible. He grins. True, lavender taxes are no joke. And just like that, you and the Sultan sit there, two people under stars beside a slightly less depressed flower soaking in the quiet stretch of the night. Somewhere nearby, a court poet recites something about love and dew and eternity, but the words barely reach you. The garden's rhythm has slowed like it's breathing between verses. Then, from a distance comes the soft, distinctive clatter of metal cymbals tapping in a slow heartbeat rhythm. That's the signal. The next phase of the festival is beginning, and it's one few outsiders have ever witnessed. The Sultan stands and nods to you. Come. You glance around, then point to yourself. Me, he nods. Tonight, you belong to the garden. That's the most elegant way anyone has ever told you to keep tagging along, so you follow him past the reflecting pool down a pathway flanked by flickering lanterns and sleepy guards who pretend not to see the Sultan, because, again, that's part of the game. You reach a cluster of trees surrounded by short hedges carved into Ottoman script. Yes, even the shrubs spell poetry here. What tree? Within the grove, a group of men and women sit in a loose circle, their backs straight, hands open, in their laps. A quiet murmur flows through them like a stream. The Sultan joins the circle and gestures for you to sit as well. The mood here is different. Less spectacle, more sacred. A calligrapher recites a tulip verse in Ottoman Turkish, so ancient and slow it sounds like it's dripping from stone. After each stanza, someone replies not with words but with a single flute note or the ringing of a brass bowl. You're in a poetry meditation. Of course you are. And you're expected to participate. A young woman leans over and hands you a small folded piece of paper. Write a line, she whispers. A wish, a truth. Something you've lost. You freeze, then write. I lost the part of myself that didn't believe in magic. She takes it, nods, and adds it to a stack of scrolls placed beside a vase of withered tulips. One by one, the verses are added, forming a kind of ephemeral prayer pile. Later, they'll be buried beneath the tulip beds where the roots will read them in silence. You don't ask how they know that. By now you've learned the garden doesn't explain itself. It just is. You close your eyes and listen to the music, the breeze, the pulse of a kingdom that blooms briefly and brilliantly beneath the moon. And somewhere to your right, Silent Widow opens one more petal. You're not entirely sure how long you've been sitting in that poetry circle. Time seems to bend inside the garden. Minutes stretch and collapse like silk in the breeze. One moment, you're scribbling secret thoughts on scented parchment, and the next, someone is handing you a sugar-dusted fig and whispering that it's time for the tulip auction. Tulip auction. You blink twice to make sure you heard that, right then follow the quiet crowd down a winding path lined with cushions and velvet ropes. The air grows warmer here, as if even the wind is curious about what's coming. You arrive at an open-air pavilion lit by suspended glass orbs, each orb containing a small floating candle and the occasional moth that clearly wasn't invited. And there, center stage on a table gilded with mother of pearl and just a bit too much drama, stands the tulip. Not just any tulip. This one is shaped like fire. No, really. It's streaked with crimson orange and flickering gold like someone dipped a flame in dew. Its name whispered with reverence is the Sultan's pulse. Of course it is. An announcer with a voice like honey and authority steps forward and begins the ceremony. We begin tonight's bidding. he says at one entire orchard of pomegranates. You blink. Did he say orchard? Yes, he did. The bidding escalates quickly. One man offers a bolt of Persian silk woven with golden threads. Another ups it with 3 Arabian horses, each trained to bow when hearing music. A woman counters with a diamond the size of a walnut and a promise of exclusive rights to a mountain stream. You're watching a full-on floral arms race, and you're pretty sure that Tulip's only job is to sit in a pot and look smug. Historians still debate whether these midnight auctions were legitimate economic events or just elaborate social theater. Were the trades real? Were the tulips actually delivered? Or was this all a way to show off like high-stakes Monopoly, but with actual goats and shipping rights? No one knows for sure. But right now, under the swaying lanterns and the careful gaze of a tulip that knows it's worth more than your extended family, you start to understand the madness. Because it's not really about the tulip. It's about the performance, the symbolism, the ability to assign value to something utterly fleeting. To say, look how powerful I am, I just traded a sapphire mine for a flower that will wilt by Thursday. There's something deeply, hilariously human in that. Just as the bidding hits 2 palaces and a trained elephant that can paint a hush falls. The Sultan rises from his seat in the back. Yes, he's back in full regal gear again. Costume changes are part of his brand and raises a hand. Enough, he says softly. The crowd freezes. You do 2 mid-sip of rose syrup. He approaches the tulip. All eyes are on him. He doesn't buy it. He doesn't take it. He doesn't even touch it. He simply bows to it. The announcer clears his throat. The Sultan honors the bloom. It shall not be owned. Everyone applauds. The tulip gets a standing ovation. Somewhere in the garden, a deer probably applauds with its hooves. The auction ends, and the crowd disperses in hushed awe like they've just witnessed a philosophical TED Talk disguised as a flower sale. You wander over to a quiet edge of the garden where an elderly servant is polishing a bulb. Not a blooming tulip, a bulb. Just sitting there, dirt-smudged and unglamorous. Why the bulb, you ask? He smiles without looking up. The root is the truth. The bloom is the story. You nod as if you totally understand that, which you don't. But it sounds wise, and at this point, you're willing to let the metaphors wash over you like scented mist. Then he adds, also, this bulb is worth 5 camels. You choke on your syrup. He laughs. In Amsterdam, they'd pay 10. Ah, yes. You've heard whispers tonight about the Dutch, about their own tulip fever, how it infected Europe like a scented virus, about how 1 tulip bulb in Holland supposedly cost more than a canal house. The Ottomans might have started the trend, but the Dutch turned it into speculative theater. You ask if there's ever been an Ottoman tulip bubble. The servant nods. Once in the year of the fat moon, prices got so high that a man sold his cousin to fund a garden. The cousin was delighted. He hated math and loved sunshine. You don't know whether he's joking. You don't ask. Instead, you walk the garden's perimeter tulips, leaning sleepily toward you like gossiping ants. A group of musicians begins playing a soft tune from within a thicket of roses, a kind of dreamy underwater lullaby. The notes seem to bend and shimmer in the air, almost visible. And that's when you realize the musicians are hiding, not figuratively, literally. They're crouched behind hedges, inside decorative lantern towers, even inside massive clay pots. You hear a flute note and peer into a tree. Sure enough, a man is playing from a hollow branch. You turn to a courtier nearby. Is this normal? She nods. The Sultan prefers that music feel like it's coming from the garden itself. You sigh. Of course he does. So now, you're walking through the world's most elaborate game of musical hide-and-seek. The melody guides you from flowerbed to footpath, one invisible note at a time. And every now and then, you think you hear words inside the music, something like a whisper or a sigh. But when you pause, it's gone. The garden is alive, yes, but not just with flowers, with layers, with secrets, with tulips that aren't for sale, with emperors who bow instead of buy, with musicians that vanish into shrubbery like melodic ghosts, and with you, the stranger, the outsider, the accidental tulip therapist, still wandering under moonlight, wondering how deep this dream really goes. You've now reached that strange, floaty part of the night where the air feels like warm velvet, and your thoughts arrive half a step behind your footsteps. The garden has shifted into a new rhythm, not silent, but hushed, as if even the leaves have agreed to whisper for the rest of the night. You follow the trail of invisible music toward a shallow basin filled with water, and there you stop, because the water is full of lanterns, dozens of them, each one a delicate glass sculpture shaped like lotus flowers, gently bobbing in perfect rows. They float without drifting, anchored by silk threads no wider than hair. Their flames flicker inside like tiny golden hearts. Around the pool, servants in dark blue sashes light them, using reeds dipped in oil and fire. A young girl leans toward one of the lanterns, whispers something into its flame, and lets it go. The lantern floats forward a few inches and joins the others like it heard the call. You lean closer and realize each lantern contains a message, some scribbled on slips of rice paper, some painted directly onto the glass. Prayers, poems, promises. One even seems to contain a tiny sketch of a man proposing to a tulip. This is the wish-water ceremony whispered about in corners of the court and witnessed by only the lucky or the lost. You don't even try to understand the protocol. You just sit by the edge and watch. The scene is breathtaking, glowing petals adrift, soft flute music threading between breeze and leaf, and above it all the stars blinking like they're trying not to interrupt. "Do you have a wish?" a voice asks. You turn. A woman in silver robes, face half veiled in silk, stands beside you, holding a small lantern, unlit, cool to the touch. She offers you a brush and ink. You hesitate. What do you even write in a moment like this? Eventually, you scrawl. "Let this not be a dream I forget." She smiles. Without reading it, lights the wick and sets it gently on the water. Your lantern floats slowly out, finds a place among the others, and flickers in sync like it's always belonged. And then from the far side of the garden comes a burst of laughter, sharp and chaotic, utterly out of place. You follow the sound and find yourself in a courtyard bustling with motion. Trays of food, jugs of spiced wine, strings of orange blossom hung between lantern posts. This is the late-night feast, technically not part of the official tulip rites, but nobody argues with post-poetry snacks. You grab something that looks like a pastry and turns out to be a cheese-filled cloud of ecstasy. A court jester juggles 3 pomegranates while riding a donkey. A woman balances a bowl of steaming rice on her head while telling a joke about a scribe and a goose. Everyone's a little delirious, a little too joyful, like kids at a sleepover who realize no one's coming to tell them to go to bed. It's the part of the night when ceremony breaks into celebration. When the sultans relax their posture, the guards unbuckle their sandals, and the peacocks sneak bites from abandoned dessert trays. You find yourself laughing with a group of young courtiers playing a game called Guess the Tulip Name, which turns out to be dangerously competitive. Someone shouts, Pale Desire. Someone else shouts, No, that one's Cinnamon Rebellion. A third person says, That's just a carrot, and gets thrown in a decorative fountain. You slip away before you get pulled into the debate and wander toward the far side of the garden where the lights grow dimmer and the revelers fewer. Here, things turn secret again. You find a narrow bridge arching over a channel of black water. It's lit only by 2 lanterns and the reflection of the moon. As you cross, you notice rows of tulips planted in boxes along the railing, except these are unlike any you've seen before. Each one is labeled with a name and a date. The petals are preserved dry but not wilted. Some are over 100 years old. You read the names aloud, softly. The crescent's regret, whisper of gold, morning violet. A plaque at the center reads, The Silent Gallery. A voice low and deliberate speaks behind you. These are the tulips that bloomed when emperors died. You turn. An old man in heavy robes stands nearby, arms crossed, eyes soft. Each time an Ottoman Sultan passed, he continues a tulip bloomed in his garden. These are the ones we kept. You want to ask how that's possible, how a tulip can mark a death like a clock striking grief. But somehow, you know that's not the point. They bloom only once he says. But their silence outlasts song. And then quietly, he's gone absorbed into the shadows like the end of a verse. You lean over the railing and exhale slowly. There's a gravity here, a stillness that doesn't demand attention, but holds it anyway. For all the music and sherbet and sparkle, there's this, the reminder that the night ends, the empire shifts, and even the brightest tulip must fall. But not yet. The festival still hums behind you, gentle and half-dreaming. And you continue along the path deeper into the story, wondering what else the night is hiding in its sleeves. You leave the silent gallery behind, stepping softly, as if your feet still remember the weight of those names carved into the tulip boxes. The garden widens again. The mood lightens. You catch glimpses of laughter bouncing off marble arches. Somewhere nearby, a peacock screams like a kazoo stuck in a thunderstorm, which somehow still feels elegant here. A servant brushes past you carrying a folded canopy, muttering, "We'll need to make space for the poets." You arch an eyebrow. More poetry. Apparently, yes, but not the quiet, solemn kind. This time, it's a duel. You follow a trail of carpets unfurled across a circular clearing in the grass. Velvet cushions form a makeshift arena. Courtiers gather like spectators at a tennis match, only here, instead of rackets, the weapons are metaphors. And the winners walk away with applause and maybe a handful of candied chestnuts. The poetry duel begins with a flourish. 2 men step forward, their robes flowing dramatically in the breeze, their eyebrows arched like they've been rehearsing in mirrors. One wears crimson silk and a tulip pin shaped like a dagger. The other has a beard so sculpted it deserves its own monogram chair. They bow not to each other, but to the Sultan, who now lounges in a nearby pavilion, sipping something that sparkles ominously. A page reads out the challenge, composed verses inspired by the tulip and the moon and betrayal. Of course, that old trio. The first poet steps forward. His voice is low and theatrical. O tulip, born from moonlight's grief, your petal hides a traitor's sheath. I kissed your stem, I bled my trust, you bloomed and left my heart in dust. A respectable gasp ripples through the crowd. A woman drops her fan. The peacock sneezes. The second poet smirks paces in a slow circle, then delivers. You call her bloom a liar's veil. Her curves you claim conceal betrayal, sir. You confuse a flower's grace with failure born upon your face. Oh, the crowd loses it. Quietly, of course. This is still an empire of decorum, but you definitely hear someone choke on a pistachio. You laugh too loudly and immediately regret it, because the second poet turns and points at you. This one, he says, this humble guest unbent by court or crown, even the tulips lean toward them. Suddenly, you are no longer anonymous. You are somehow the subject of a sonnet. The first poet narrows his eyes. Ah, the flower whisperer. Let's test their power. He approaches with dramatic flair. What rhymes with mystery? He asks, hand on heart. You freeze. A dozen terrible options sprint through your brain. History, bravery, chicken rotisserie. You clear your throat and say, whisper me. There's a pause, then applause. Somewhere, someone claps with their sandals. The Sultan chuckles. The duel continues without you. The poet's now volleying stanzas about petals and regret and the emotional stability of certain onions. You slowly back away and melt into the crowd, cheeks warm, ears buzzing, with the strange feeling of being temporarily immortalized in iambic pentameter. You wander toward a side path not quite away from the festival, but off the main route. The lanterns thin. The tulips grow taller here, wilder, as if they haven't been trimmed into polite shapes. You see vines curling up marble statues and hear frogs arguing in the distance. Then you stumble upon something you didn't expect to see tonight, a tiny stage no larger than a door nestled beneath an olive tree. Upon it, two court musicians, faces, veiled fingers, nimble play instruments so delicate they barely seem real. One plays a knee flute, its breathy notes coiling like smoke. The other plays what looks like a harp, crossed with a spiderweb the strings shimmering in the air. You sit on the grass. No one else is here. The musicians don't acknowledge you, but the music does. It reaches out and tugs softly at your chest like a memory you forgot you'd left unlocked. As they play, fireflies rise around the stage, swirling lazily. The music isn't sad exactly. It's more like moonlight translated into sound, or the silence between thoughts. You lose track of time. Eventually, the music ends. The musicians bow to no one in particular and vanish behind the tree. You remain sitting. The garden continues to hum around you. It's as if the whole place knows the night can't last forever, so it leans into the dream while it still can. And then you hear it. A single bell, soft, distant, followed by two more. A signal. From the center of the festival, a new event is beginning. You rise dust grass from your robe and make your way back, tulips brushing your ankles like sleepy cats. You return just in time to see a line of flower bearers entering the main circle, each carrying a vase. Each vase holding a tulip said to be descended from a legendary bloom. One allegedly grew on the battlefield of Chaldiran, another from a tulip rescued during a palace fire, one from a bulb smuggled back by a poet exiled to Venice. They are not judged, they are not sold, they are recited to. The Sultan himself stands and begins to speak, not to the audience, but to the tulips. A poem slow and low about legacy and wind and the sound of a page turning. The entire garden leans closer. You do too. And for a moment, it doesn't feel absurd. It feels eternal. After the Sultan finishes his final word, something like silk-born breath or petals end light, the garden holds its breath. The kind of pause where even the trees feel reverent, as though they too understood what had just been spoken. Then, like ripples in a pond, movement returns. The courtiers begin to murmur again, though quieter now, as if the poem had left a velvet hush over everyone's thoughts. A court musician plays a single note, a high, mournful tone from a reed flute, and it melts into the air like sugar into tea. You back away from the circle, the weight of the Sultan's words still sitting in your chest like a stone wrapped in honey. Just as you start heading toward a nearby fountain to sit and decompress, you're intercepted by a court attendant holding a plate of something suspiciously pink. Sherbet, she says, rose and almond. Very important that you accept. You nod and take it, because, apparently, declining royal desserts is how you end up exiled to an apricot farm. You sip. It tastes like floral soap got into a fight with melted ice cream. It's oddly comforting. As you lower your cup, a flicker of movement catches your eye, a man in foreign robes, heavy and velvet-lined, knocking over a small dish of sugar cubes as he attempts to sit cross-legged on a cushion. He's red-faced, sweating, and clearly not from around here. An ambassador from Venice, judging by the embroidery. And he is struggling. You watch as he adjusts his hat no fewer than 6 times, then proceeds to drop a scroll knock over his own sherbet, and with alarming grace sit on it. The gasps are audible. You wince. A servant appears, instantly blotting the silk cushion, whispering something urgently in Ottoman Turkish. The ambassador responds in what you can only assume is panicked Italian, gesturing wildly toward a very unimpressed tulip. You move closer purely out of self-preservation level curiosity. A courtier near you mutters, "Oh no, not again." You ask again. She sighs. Last year, the French envoy tried to toast with olive oil. Before that, a Hungarian count offered to fix the tulip shortage by cross-breeding them with potatoes. You blink. That's bold, she nods, and deeply offensive. Tonight, it seems the Venetian ambassador has made his move. He's trying to present a gift. You see a servant approach with a small wooden box, clearly wrapped with unnecessary confidence. The Sultan, now returned to his throne-shaped divan, raises an eyebrow. The box is opened. Inside is a tulip bulb, a Dutch one. The garden stills. A collective inhale so subtle, so synchronized, it's like the tulips themselves are watching. You feel the tension in the air. This is no ordinary bulb. This is a symbol of Europe's tulip fever, their economic madness. The time when tulip bulbs sold for mansions and merchants cried over moldy petals. Bringing one here to the heart of the Ottoman garden. That's like showing up to a chef's table and handing them a microwave dinner. The Sultan smiles. It's not warm. "Ah," he says, lifting the bulb with 2 fingers, "you bring us a memory of our children's obsession." The ambassador nods eagerly. Yes, yes, a rare one. Semper Augustus. A name that echoes. A bulb so rare, so volatile, it once bankrupted Dutch investors. The Sultan turns the bulb slowly in his palm, as though weighing it against centuries. He then places it gently, pointedly on a napkin beside him. Then, to the surprise of everyone, he pours a small trickle of sherbet over it. The crowd erupts in laughter, polite, polished, but very real. You look around. The ambassador laughs too, but it's the nervous, I don't speak the language, but I hope this is fine laugh. He wipes his brow. The bulb sits now sticky and awkward beside a silk napkin embroidered with tulip motifs far more elegant than it deserves. Later, the bulb will mysteriously vanish. Rumors will spread. Some will say it was planted behind the bathhouse. Others will say it was fed to a royal goose. One courtier will swear it was dipped in rose water and used as a stress toy by the Sultan himself. Historians still debate whether this moment was a diplomatic jab, an inside joke, or a floral mic drop. There are, as you might guess, no surviving records. But for now, the music resumes a little lighter. The mood lifts, and the tulips, as always, sway gently in their boxes, as if amused. You find a spot near a low wall, sit down, and breathe. The garden moves around you, dancers twirling like petals in the wind, servants gliding with trays like chess pieces, the soft clink of goblets and low murmur of nighttime jokes. A nobleman nearby is using his turban as a napkin. No one corrects him. Above it all, the moon hangs like a witness, full and perfectly indifferent. You sip the last of your sherbet. Somewhere, a musician hits a sour note and turns it into a graceful trill. The Sultan laughs again, not loudly, but with that same quiet authority that has kept this entire empire spinning through the hours like a tulip's slow, deliberate bloom. And for a moment, you forget where you are, because you've been in this garden forever, because you belong here now not as a guest, but as part of the story. You stretch your legs and brush a rose petal off your shoulder, then realize you don't remember how it got there, which is kind of the theme of the night. Really, things appear without explanation, glide past without elegance, and vanish like sighs. A servant glides by carrying a jug of something that glows faintly. You decide not to ask. You're just about to settle back into your post-sherbet existential haze when a loud A.M. echoes across the garden. The court freezes. You look up. There, standing too upright to be natural, is the Venetian ambassador again. He's holding a goblet the sherbet has returned and begins what you can only describe as the most accidentally disastrous toast in Ottoman history. To the, tulips, he says, in heavily accented Ottoman. Long may they bloom with prosperity. You can feel the entire garden wincing as a group. He lifts the goblet high and turns to bow, except his foot catches on the hem of his embroidered robe, which he apparently didn't train for. The goblet flies from his hand like a startled dove. The entire contents bright pink, slightly sticky, probably expensive arcs through the air and lands with perfect, almost cinematic precision on the sleeve of a grand vizier. Not just a grand vizier. The grand vizier, the one who writes laws, oversees armies, and most importantly, does not enjoy sticky sleeves. The silence that follows is so pure it almost rings. The vizier looks at his arm, looks at the ambassador, looks at the goblet on the floor like it personally insulted his lineage, Then slowly, very slowly, he takes out a lace handkerchief and begins blotting his robe with the quiet dignity of a man restraining himself from declaring war over dessert. The ambassador is visibly trembling. Somewhere behind a column, a courtier mutters, "Third incident this week." You expect the Sultan to explode, to shout, to summon guards, to issue a royal decree about beverage-related offenses. But instead, the Sultan rises, walks slowly to the vizier, and says in a tone so dry it could parch roses, "Well, at least now you smell like the festival." The garden erupts, not in chaos and laughter, true layered multi-class laughter. Even the peacocks join in with shrieking approval. The ambassador confused, but grateful laughs too, possibly out of relief, possibly out of shock, possibly because he's lost all understanding of how anything works here anymore. You smile. It's a perfect moment, absurd, diplomatic, sticky, and somehow human. The tension dissolves and people return to their seats, wiping tears from their eyes. Someone offers the ambassador a change of robe. Someone else offers him a second sherbet, which he wisely refuses. Later, you find yourself near a colonnade lined with hanging silks that move like water. As you walk, you overhear small pieces of conversation like pearls dropped along the path. Last year's fireworks almost burned the peacock stable. She named the Tulip after her cat. And then the tulip refused to bloom unless it heard the oud. The garden, for all its grace, is a well-oiled machine of nonsense and beauty. You come to a small platform near a pond where young poets are scribbling onto palm-sized scrolls. A servant explains that these are festival ephemera verses written just for tonight, then tied to paper balloons and released at dawn. The idea, let the wind decide which poems survive. You're handed a scroll and a piece of charcoal, no instructions, just instinct. You write, "If the wind forgets me, let the tulips remember." You tie it to the string of a small papery lantern shaped like a pomegranate. A young boy with inky fingers takes it, nods solemnly, and places it in a basket among a dozen others. They will all rise in the morning, drifting over the Bosphorus poems, sailing into the sky like blessings or confessions without addresses. As you stand brushing charcoal from your thumb, you spot someone familiar. The Sultan, again back in linen, no crown, no attendants, just him, looking up at the lanterns and maybe smiling. You're close enough now to hear him murmur, "The tulips bloom because we ask them to." But the stories bloom without permission. He doesn't look at you. He doesn't need to. You just nod. Because he's right. You think about everything you've seen tonight. The lanterns, the scrolls, the poetry duels, the perfume tents, the ancient tulips preserved like relics of breath. And now, this moment, this absurd perfect mix of beauty and accident. You suddenly realize this wasn't a party. It wasn't a ritual. It wasn't even just a tradition. It was theater, history, written in petals and sherbet. And somehow, you're in it. You sit for a while longer, watching the breeze toy with the edge of your robe. You let the night settle back over your shoulders like a soft cloak. And you wait, because you know the garden isn't finished with you yet. Somewhere, a bell chimes again. The bell chimes once more slower, now deeper, like a heartbeat muffled by velvet. You rise along with the others who heard it and understood. No one tells you where to go. You just follow the way the lantern seemed to lean, how the gravel path straightens like it's gently guiding your feet. You pass a low archway carved from white marble, half swallowed by vines. Beyond it, the garden seems to change, less curated, less symmetrical. The tulips here grow wild and tall, some curling as if stretching toward forgotten stars. And tucked among them, flickering quietly, are soft amber flames. You've entered the realm of the storytellers. They sit in small circles around braziers wrapped in cloaks of patterned wool and perfumed silk, their voices just above whispers. Each holds a talisman, a ring, a feather, a carved walnut shell. You don't know why, and no one tells you. You're gently ushered to one of the circles. The storyteller before you is an old woman with long silver hair, twisted like a rope over one shoulder. She's chewing on a fig seed, or maybe just pretending till her grin is too mischievous to trust completely. She begins without greeting, without ceremony, as if continuing a tale she started many years ago, and only now remembered you were listening. Once, she says, in a time when the tulips bloomed upside down and the moon refused to sleep, there was a flower that changed an empire. You lean forward. You always do when someone starts with once. She speaks of a tulip, so rare, so stubborn, it bloomed only for 1 hour every 7 years, and only at midnight, and only if the wind was southerly and the stars spelled out a particular poem. No one knew what it looked like, she said, because every time it bloomed, the person who saw it fell asleep with a smile and never woke up. You raise an eyebrow. She shrugs. Some called it the death tulip. Others called it peace. The truth is, those who saw it weren't scared. They were full, whole, done. You try to imagine a flower so beautiful it ends you. And the Sultan, she continues, he wanted it, not to possess it, no. He wanted to be the one to bloom it, to see it, to understand what it meant to be so complete that waking up no longer mattered. She lets the silence stretch. What happened, you ask? She leans in, voice low. He failed. You blink. He tried every condition, every chant, every mixture of soil. He even built a clock that only ticked when the moon blinked. You open your mouth to ask how that's even possible, but she cuts you off. And one night, he stood in the garden, hands full of hope and candle wax, and the flower began to bloom, only for him to look away, just for a moment, just to check the stars. She clicks her tongue. Gone, never came again. You sit back. The other listeners are still as if made of air. She smiles. Sometimes the story is the flower, and we're all just walking around it, hoping it opens. And with that, she begins chewing on the fig seed again. Conversation over. You thank her, though you're not sure why. You stand, though your knees feel softer than they should. And you walk again. The garden hums with the aftertaste of fables. Around a bend, you stumble upon a pavilion of mirrors, tiny curved panes arranged in the shapes of tulips. You approach one and see your reflection distorted, stretched like a memory, trying to reach back to you. Another shows you younger, another older. One shows you holding a tulip in your hand, one you haven't picked yet. You keep walking. A voice catches your ear, not loud, but precise. It's a man in a white robe with golden stitching, seated alone at a stone table, writing slowly with a stylus dipped in blue ink. He glances up. You've lasted longer than most. You smile politely. Lasted through what? He gestures around. The garden, the stories, the seduction of beauty. Some come, they marvel, they leave. Others stay. A few get rewritten. You ask what he means by rewritten. He taps the stylus against his palm. Everyone brings a story in with them. Few leave with the same one. He offers you a seat. You sit. He asks you nothing. Just begins writing on a small scrap of parchment, folding it once, twice, then handing it to you. Do not open it until dawn, he says. If you're still here, you slip the parchment into your sleeve like it's warm. You rise again because you feel something. A shift, a pulse, a soft tug behind your navel. The garden is calling again. This time, it pulls you back toward the heart of the festival. The music has softened. The lanterns now burn lower, their flames small, their glass smudged with dew. The tulips have all turned slightly as if dozing. Even the peacocks are asleep, heads tucked under jeweled wings. You pass the poetry circle, empty now, the scrolls gone. You pass the musicians' hedges, the flutes silent. You pass the judges' pavilion, where the winning tulip now sits alone on a pedestal, bathed in soft candlelight, no longer the center of the world, but a quiet survivor of it. And then, at the edge of the central fountain, you see her, blushing crescent, the tulip that first leaned toward you, that began your accidental promotion to unofficial flower therapist. She's still open, and you realize she waited. You kneel beside her and say nothing. There is nothing to say, but you do notice one thing: her petals are trembling, not from wind, from you, from the fact that you're still here. You sit beside blushing Crescent the tulip, who somehow decided you were worth blooming for. She leans ever so slightly in your direction, as if the garden's weight has gently shifted again. It's a small thing, but in a night filled with lanterns, emperors, and rosewater politics, small suddenly feels profound. You touch the edge of her petal just once, careful not to bruise the silk-thin surface. It's cool, soft, alive. You whisper something, maybe a thank you, maybe just a breath, and rise again, letting the tulip return to her quiet vigil. The garden has thinned, not in beauty, but in presence. Many guests have quietly disappeared like mist evaporating from marble. A few remain poets clutching at half-filled scrolls, musicians coiled in sleep beneath cypress trees, a young boy feeding pomegranate seeds to a turtle with diplomatic precision. You step away from the main grounds and find yourself drawn toward a darker part of the garden, one that doesn't glow with firelight or shimmer with music. The lanterns stop here, the tulips end. The air feels heavier, scented, not with rose, but with earth. At first, you think you've reached to the boundary, but then between two twisting olive trees, you spot a shape, a small dome, half covered in ivy. You part the vines. A door, not grand, not ceremonial, just an arched slab of stone with no handle and no inscription. But something about it feels old, older than the garden, older than the palace. You press your hand to the cool surface. Nothing happens. And then, with the kind of creak that sounds like it hasn't been used in years, the door swings open inward. Of course it does. Inside it's cool and narrow. A staircase winds downward, the air growing damp and fragrant with roots and stone. You hesitate. But you've come this far, and frankly, you're not sure whether this is real anymore, so why not? You descend. The passage opens into a chamber lit only by oil lamps, their flames small, flickering, stubborn. And in the center of the room, a tulip. One tulip, growing from a patch of soil that's surrounded by water. No pots, no cushions, just a circle of stillness. The tulip is white, but not plain. It glows faintly like it was painted by moonlight itself. Its petals are veined with the softest silver, and its stem is so straight it almost vibrates with tension. You sit, you wait, you do not speak. After a time, a woman appears from the shadows, ancient, serene, cloaked in gray. She carries a book that seems to be made of tulip leaves, stitched with thread so fine it might be made of spider silk. She opens it without looking. Only one person sees it. Each year, she says, voice smooth as still water. One guest, chosen not by rank or wealth or poetry, but by the garden. You blink. Why? She tilts her head. Why does a tulip bloom in moonlight? Why does it bow to one voice and not another? Why do we whisper stories into petals and set them afloat like ships we'll never see again? You shrug. She smiles. Exactly. She gestures toward the tulip. Would you like to name it? You stare at the flower. It doesn't need a name. It's beyond a name. But still, something rises from your chest like steam. You say memory before waking. She nods. Then so it shall be. Until next year. She takes a petal from a pouch, dips it in ink, and writes the name in the book. The tulip shivers slightly, acknowledging you, or saying goodbye. You don't know. The woman closes the book. The oil lamps dim one by one. She offers no farewell, just disappears back into the shadow she came from. You climb the staircase again. When you return to the garden, the sky is shifting black into blue, like the world quietly flipping its page. The air is cooler now. A few tulips have closed. Some still glow faintly. The musicians are gone. The courtiers gone. The laughter, now a dream you once overheard. You walk alone past the fountain, past the poetry stage, past the throne of silk, where the Sultan once toasted invisible stars. It's all there and not there, like you're walking through the ghost of the night. And then behind you, you hear soft footsteps. You turn. The Sultan, back in his simplest robe, no guards, no ceremony. He walks beside you without invitation, just presence. You saw it, he says. You nod. It named you too, he adds. You say nothing. You walk together in silence for a while, two people who no longer need words. And when you reach the garden's gate, the one where it all began, he stops. This night, he says, was never meant to last. That's why it works. You glance at him. He smiles. Beauty with an exit strategy. Keeps us from ruining it. You both laugh softly, as if not to wake the tulips. He turns and walks back into the garden. His form blurs in the morning mist. You pass through the gate just as the sun breaks over the Bosphorus. You step beyond the garden's threshold and into the cool hush of early dawn. The city stirs around you, but softly, like someone shifting in sleep rather than waking. The Bosphorus is a pale ribbon of silver, and the air carries that strange perfume of waterstone and just the faintest echo of tulip dust. Behind you, the gate you pass through looks ordinary again. Just a gate, just iron and wood. If someone walked past it now, they might not notice it at all. They wouldn't know what bloomed behind those walls or how the night whispered in silk. You reach into your sleeve and remember the slip of parchment the scribe handed you. You hesitate, then open it. A single line written in the bluest ink. You didn't dream it, but you won't prove it either, of course. You fold it back and slide it into your pocket, where it feels heavier than it should, like a key to a door that no longer exists. As you wander through the palace garden's outer courtyards, you notice the gardeners beginning their work, pruning roses, feeding fish, untying velvet ribbons from last night's decorations. You pass one who's gathering fallen petals into a satchel. He hums the same flute tune you heard echoing from the bushes hours ago. He glances at you, winks. You say nothing. You come upon a small table where two scribes sip cardamom tea. They don't acknowledge you. They're too busy laughing at something in a record book. And then the ambassador offered a second tulip as apology, only it was made of soap, one of them says. The vizier's face, I swear. You smile but keep walking. No one here is pretending last night didn't happen, but they also won't speak of it in full sentences, because the Midnight Tulip Festival doesn't get archived. It gets absorbed. You wander further and pass a young girl sweeping petals off a fountain's edge. You pause and ask, "Did the tulips close already?" She nods. The smart ones did. The others are still waiting for applause. She grins and keeps sweeping. You continue on, shoes scuffing the damp stone head, fogged but light. You should feel tired, utterly exhausted, in fact, but you don't. You feel lifted, like sleep is somewhere in your chest now, not in your eyes. You pass the palace kitchens. The scent of roasted bread and pistachio halva trails behind you like an invisible cloak. A boy runs by carrying a basket of lemons, followed by a cat with very serious tulip-chasing energy. Everything's waking up. You turn into a shaded passage where the walls are covered in faded frescoes. Birds, stars, crescent moons. You lean against the cool stone for a moment, and just as your head touches the wall, you hear a sound, a poem, not spoken aloud, but remembered. Your own words, the one you wrote in charcoal. If the wind forgets me, let the tulips remember. Somewhere in the distance, a paper lantern floats over the water. You wonder if yours is among them, sailing toward the sun, or sinking slowly into the sea like a message the world wasn't ready to read. You walk out into the city. The gates of the palace fade behind you, swallowed by the bustle of morning. Street vendors shout. Pigeons argue over crumbs. Someone nearby plays a zither badly. You could tell someone what happened. You could try to explain the flutes from hedges, the flame-shaped tulips, the poem duel where you accidentally became a metaphor. You could describe the tunnel, the glowing white bloom, the Sultan, in slippers, sipping sherbet. But no one would believe you. And deep down, you realize that's the point. The Midnight Tulip Festival wasn't for proof. It was for the part of you that still listens when the wind moves through leaves and wonders if the branches are whispering secrets. It was for the part of you that still believes a flower might bloom for you alone. You cross the Galata Bridge as the sun stretches its golden fingers across the city. Somewhere behind the hills, the last lantern vanishes into daylight. Somewhere in your sleeve, the parchment still rests like a heartbeat. And somewhere deep within the palace garden, a single tulip, memory before waking, opens for just one more moment before folding in on itself with grace. It will bloom again next year, maybe, if the story still remembers you. You move through the waking city as if still part of the dream, though your feet now touch solid ground and the cobblestones beneath you carry the clatter of carts and the murmur of bakers opening shop. A seagull screams with far less elegance than a tulip, and you realize that you've returned to the world of mismatched sandals, overheard arguments and smells that are far more fish than rose. But it doesn't feel disappointing. It feels distant, like you're still tethered to the garden by an invisible thread, soft as silk, strong as memory. You wander through a spice market. Vendors call to you in multiple languages, offering dried apricots, star anise, and mulberry paste with confidence that borders on weaponized charm. You nod politely and accept a fig square, but the taste doesn't linger. Not like sherbet, not like honey-dripped words spoken under moonlight. You hear a group of boys running through the alleyway, one of them shouting, "Last one to the tulip bed is a donkey's eyebrow." You smile. Tulips are everywhere in Istanbul, printed on ceramics, painted on tiles, stitched into embroidery, but they all feel different now. Dimmed. Museum versions of something once alive. And still your fingers twitch, wanting to write something. A verse, a memory, anything to remind yourself that it happened. You find a quiet fountain near a mosque courtyard and sit. The breeze curls around your ear like a whisper. You reach for a scrap of paper, something to anchor the night before it fades into the fog of disbelief. But as you open your satchel, a small folded parchment flutters out, not the one the scribe gave you, but something else, thin, crisp, scrawled in a hurried looping hand. You are now part of the soil. Plant your own bloom, it will know the way. There's no signature, no seal, but you know whose hand it was. She never said her name, that storyteller beneath the olive tree, but you remember her fig seed smile and eyes older than stone. You fold the note, place it next to the other in your pocket, and sit in the sun a little longer. You start to think back. The flame-shaped tulip on the pedestal, the night music blooming from hedges, the story of the sultan who missed the flower because he checked the stars. Was that a metaphor? A warning. You wonder if the whole night was designed that way, a lesson told in soft footsteps and open petals. A reminder that beauty doesn't announce itself. It arrives quietly. And if you're too busy looking up, you'll miss it opening right at your feet. Nearby, a small boy stops to tie his sandal. His little sister picks a tulip from the corner of the plaza, a rough city-tamed one, and holds it toward him. He doesn't look up. You do. And in the distance, you think you see a flicker of red silk vanishing around a corner, too fast to follow, too real to ignore. Was it a courtier, a musician, a whisper? No. You decide it was just the wind. You rise and begin to walk again, not toward anything in particular. You let the city carry you. Later, as dusk approaches, you find a garden, a small one, half wild, barely noticed. Just a square of dirt behind a crumbling stone wall. Children have planted beans. Someone's abandoned an orange crate. But in one corner, there's a single tulip, yellow, crooked, growing defiantly next to a drain. You crouch beside it. The petals twitch in the breeze. You don't say anything. You don't need to. And as you stand, you realize your shoes are still dusted with the fine white grit of Topkappa's stone paths. Still there, clinging like memory, you smile, then walk on quietly. Because that night wasn't meant to last. But its roots are everywhere now. The final shadows of day begin to stretch long across the stones, and you find yourself wandering with no direction, only a strange sort of pull in your chest, as though something left behind is still trailing a thread through your spine, tugging gently. You're not ready to go home and not quite sure what home is anymore now that you've walked where tulips told stories and sherbet could spark diplomacy. Eventually, you find yourself near the water, the Bosphorus, once again, its surface turning from silver to bruised gold beneath the setting sun. Fishermen cast their lines in slow arcs. Gulls circle like old men waiting for gossip. The breeze is heavier here, tinged with salt and the iron scent of ships, and you realize it's almost been a full day since the garden. A single day. You sit on the seawall watching the boats drift past. On the opposite bank, the outlines of palaces and domes glow faintly, not with moonlight now, but the last breath of daylight. You reach into your sleeve once more and unfold the final parchment. The first line still reads the same. You didn't dream it, but you won't prove it either. But this time, you flip the paper, and there, scribbled faintly in the margin, is a second sentence you didn't notice before. Come back when you forget the way. You close your eyes. There's comfort in knowing it's not a door you can return through just because you want to, but rather one you find only when you're lost again. That's how it works. Magic needs mystery. Gardens bloom best when you stop chasing them. A boy passes with a cart of tulip bulbs. He's singing softly off-key a tune you almost recognize. You watch as he sells one bulb, small, lumpy, unimpressive, to an old woman who cradles it like treasure. The night folds itself around you, slow and soft. You remember the Sultan's voice, low and amused. Beauty with an exit strategy keeps us from ruining it. You remember the tulip in the secret chamber, glowing without need of light. The poetry duel, the lanterns, the bulb dripping with sherbet, the story you were written into, the flower that opened just for you. And most of all, you remember what the storyteller said sitting under her olive tree. Sometimes the story is the flower, and we're all just walking around it, hoping it opens. Maybe she meant the festival. Maybe she meant you. You rise slowly, not because you're tired, but because the night has changed. It's not velvet now. It's wool, softer, quieter, tucked in. You walk home by feel, through streets that look familiar, but feel layered, like you're seeing them with one foot still in the garden. A cat purrs from a windowsill. A wind chime whispers a rhythm that sounds too close to a flute. When you finally lie down in bed, your shoes still dusty, your sleeve still crinkled with memory, the city outside keeps humming, but your heart, it's full of petals. You close your eyes, and in the darkness behind your lids, a single tulip slowly unfolds. Its petals shimmer, its breath is quiet, and the world eases into silence. So now, as the last tulip folds inward and the final lantern flickers low, you let yourself drift. The garden has faded, but its roots remain in your memory, in the curl of your breath, in the strange sweetness that still lingers on your tongue. You may not remember every poem, or every petal, or which path you walked to reach the secret chamber of the bloom that named you, but the feeling, that sense of stepping through velvet silence, of walking not through space, but through story that will linger, and that's enough. Let the wind blow gently through your window now. Let the hum of night hold your shoulders like silk. Let the last of the candlelight in your mind soften until all that remains is warmth. Because the garden is gone, yes, But it was never built to stay. It was made to bloom in the dark and disappear at dawn like the best dreams do, like the best stories always should. So tonight, as you fall into sleep, imagine tulips swaying under moonlight laughter, rising from invisible poets' music, drifting through jasmine branches, and a sultan smiling quietly in linen. And you walking softly through it all, belonging, blooming, being. Rest now. Let go. The story remembers you. You are written in its roots, and it will wait. Good night.